So I have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Nothing More himself. How are you?
Doing good, man. How you doing?
Very good, very good. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I know that things didn't quite go to plan at Download, so it's really, really refreshing that you can actually do it again. In terms of, you being a drummer, you're obviously now the singer of the band. What was that sort of moment where you decided, I'm going to change and become the lead singer of the band?
Yeah, it took a while. I was the drummer since 7th grade is when I met Dan and Mark, so it wasn't until I was about 21 that I finally got the guts to just step up and do it. A lot of fears were holding me back before then. I had a kind of a formative experience when I was in like first grade, and I had to be like 6 years old, and I tried out for the choir in school, and I was like one of two kids that didn't make it, and it was a small school, so there was only like 15 kids in my class. So from that point on, I was kind of like just had this idea in my head that okay, I'm not a singer, but I'll try drums. I love music, so I'll try other things. And then another experience happened where my mother put me in a commercial audition because I really liked acting, and just froze up, bombed. I had all these adults like yelling at me, and I couldn't see anyone because it was all dark and the lights were on me. And I'll still remember it to this day, but those two experiences together kind of just gave me this feeling of like an impenetrable wall of fear to talking in front of people. Like in high school, if I had a speech, I wouldn't sleep all night. If I had the next morning, I wouldn't sleep, I wouldn't eat. Like I just was really anxious and afraid of it. And so after touring for a little while and going through multiple singers, it was one night in Mexico with a lot of tequila, got a little liquid courage in my system, and I think underneath the surface it had been bubbling up to challenge those old fears, and I finally just said, you know what, fuck it. I can go to my grave because of this fear and never having tried. And I felt like the only thing between me and a career in music was a singer, because that was our biggest thing holding us back. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I need to at least try. And so I gave myself like 2 years, and it was a very awkward, uncomfortable 2 years, and then the rest is history.
So what would you kind of have if there was any advice of kind of overcoming your fears? Because obviously that's like a massive deal that you've just been through. Yeah.
I think, there were other experiences in my life that helped me approach that situation. And one of them was wrestling in high school. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, I think, and it was just incredibly physically challenging, but also mentally challenging, because there was a lot of anxiety and fears in that as well, because you're literally gonna pseudo fight somebody. Mm-hmm. And so what I learned from that experience was like knowing what something is ahead of time and preparing yourself mentally, going, okay, this is gonna suck for a little while, but I know that, like, when I learned the drums, like, in the back of my mind, I was like, I knew that I wasn't good, and over time I got better and better, and it was just a skill. And I was like, well, what if singing's the same thing? What if it's just a skill I can acquire, and like different ways I can manipulate my voice? Because there's not anything inherently wrong with my voice, it just doesn't sound good when I sing, so maybe I'm just doing it wrong. So it was kind of a science experiment at first. And getting back to the point, though, is the biggest advice I would get is it's okay to feel bad things. It's okay to feel pain. It's okay to feel uncomfortable emotions. And getting comfortable with being uncomfortable with a goal in mind is a very good thing. I think most of the time in life, though, we avoid the uncomfortable. And I think that's all fine until you have a goal. And then when you have a goal, then you have to realize it's like, I'm in the wild and I have to eat, and there's food over there, and the only way to get there is to swim across this lake, and there's alligators, and I just have to do it. You know what I mean?
In the new album, there's a lot of references to Alan Watts. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What made you kind of use his philosophy in the actual album itself?
Yeah. I found him at like a really unique point in my life where I grew up with my parents kind of put me in church a lot, and I went to a Christian school, so I was kind of cocooned in this religious upbringing. And it wasn't until I started getting into middle or late high school that I started questioning little things. I was like, well, how does that make sense? Or, what is it? Why do I believe that? Because up until that point, I just accepted it because that's what it was. When it came to about college age, my mom's cancer had gotten real bad, and basically she was getting more religious and I was getting less religious. I was getting more agnostic and then eventually atheistic. And so Alan Watts was kind of this person I found on YouTube, just going down rabbit trails, and the things he was saying was like, actually, it was satisfying that part of you that is some people want to maybe call it the spiritually inclined, and some people don't like that word, but the part of you that's just so immersed in reality that it almost feels beyond itself. And that spiritual side he addressed, but without the bullshit and without the made up, make believe or magic. It was, and so I wanted to share that with other people because I felt like it in some ways saved me. And when I felt like my foundation had gone away, my existential foundation, how I viewed life, how I viewed myself, how I viewed, being alive or not killing myself. Why not? You know what I mean? Those kind of things that come into your head was just pulled out from under me. And I felt like a lot of people hadn't heard him.
Mental health has become a growing issue, especially in men in the music industry. I know that you guys are advocates of mental health and its awareness, but what do you think would be able to be done to increase awareness of mental health and help?
Yeah, God, that's a big question. There's a lot of things that can be done. I think most of it all starts with you, rather than trying to save everyone else. I would save yourself first, and that almost sounds opposite or selfish, but I don't think you're really any use to anyone else if you don't have a stable foundation within yourself. And a lot of that, at least in the world we live in, is mentally centered. Just taking account for all the thoughts that are going on, like seeing, for example, I'm seeing a counselor, and I started that a few years ago. It's been one of the healthiest things I've ever done. It's like, walking around and you have all these warped mirrors, other people reflecting back their own bullshit to you and telling you a little bit of truth, but it's mixed into all this other stuff. And sometimes when you go to counseling or with a professional or someone who's been trained and has seen thousands of people and can identify patterns in humans, you start having a real clear mirror that you can work with. You have a stronger foundation to start diagnosing yourself and taking actionable steps to better yourself. And then from there, I think the awareness can grow by just talking about that process, like me even, or anyone else, just talking about what helps you, what makes you more balanced. A lot of times people pick up from that so much more than if you just try to fix them. If you just share what you're doing, they just take it and run with it, ideally.
Well, that's a very positive message. So finally, what would you say the stories we tell ourselves means to you?
God, that title was kind of rattling around in my head for a good 2 years, and by the end of the record, it just resonated as this really, I don't know what the word is, but when people talk about like their creed or their almost like a code that they live their life by, like their essential truth, like at the core of every decision they make. It's almost like that for me, but it's not so much like a truth or a creed, but it's more like an understanding of something about the world that has changed my life. And that is that be careful what you say, because your ears are listening to your mouth. And what I mean by that is like,
I was trying to figure that one out.
I mean that when we talk and when we express ourselves, we often think that everything we're doing is just going out into the ether, into the world and other people's ears, and that's the end of it. But in reality, the power of our subconscious, without getting all woo-woo and stuff, there's a lot to it. And there's one very important aspect, which is the stories you tell yourself, which is, when I tell somebody that I suck at something, it increases my likelihood of sucking at it. It actually reinforces that belief at its core and feeds it. And so, like, listening to the words coming out of your mouth and going, wow, wait, why do I believe that? Why do I believe that I'm not a singer? You know, I said that those words came out of my mouth for years, and they reinforced the fear. They fed it. That's it. Stories we tell ourselves. Like, why do you believe that? You know, challenge everything you believe, and start telling yourself a different story, because that's what happens in the world. Those stories we tell ourselves start manifesting and creating themselves.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for having a chat, Matt.